I'm interviewing Barak Chamo. My name is Belle Cedillo, and I am the digital media manager here in Media. And Barak is an alumni, is that how we would say it?
I suppose alum of Currents, yeah.
Alum of Currents, from Currents University. No,
Currents
Barak,
family.
Currents family, yeah, that's a better way. Speaking of Currents family, Frank is calling me right now, um, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Barak. I am. It's a with even within sort of the scope of new media, I like to think of my work as multidisciplinary media art or new media art. I suppose I graduated from NYU's Interactive Telecommunication Program (ITP), where I spent most of my time experimenting with different forms of using and abusing technology, primarily video and image-based mediums, and I keep my practice after graduation, and now I have a studio in Brooklyn where I just develop new work, including the work that's been shown in Currents and in a recent exhibition, and yeah, keep developing my practice.
I really like that you said using and abusing technology. That's a really funny way to put it, but I do think that seeing your show, what was the title of it again? I'm sorry that I'm blanking.
Sheer appearances, yeah.
Yeah, sheer appearances was sort of using and abusing.
Yeah,
Those
I think
real
like it's it's interesting. I don't remember where that came up, but someone asked me a while ago, just a few days ago, how would I define new media? And that it's a field that is, especially as you can see from seeing the works that are on view in Currents every year, it's such a moving target. And I think the best way to think of new media as a whole is really repurposing or abusing in my mind technology that's meant for serious business purposes as really as a mean of expression, as a mean of reflecting on technology itself. And a lot of the times that happens by abusing its purpose, and sometimes even by refactoring, reformatting, restructuring what the physical form even is.
Yeah, totally. I went to a talk a few years ago, and the person giving the talk brought up the idea of hacking as being something that's not exclusive to code. It's not exclusive to hacking someone's IP address or their identity. Hacking can be putting a clarinet together wrong or upside down, and you hacked the instrument because you've abused its form.
There was this meme that used to run, I think it was like it was even before memes were memes, like early 2000s, that you don't own anything until you void the warranty. You remember things used to have a sticker that said like void if removed. And you don't really own something unless you voided the warranty and cracked it open and saw the insides. And I think more and more recently, not just what we consider technology, like a clarinet as well, which I guess was considered technology at some point in history, is becoming so opaque and such a black box that it's harder to see the inner workings. But I think there's a direct relationship between understanding how these things work, how technology operates, to understanding the place that it has in our lives. And I think there's a direct relationship between the fact that TVs are miniaturized, for example, or displays are miniaturized, to how much we consider an iPhone an extension of real life. And hacking, that's why I think hacking the form is sometimes a direct means of hacking the purpose.
Totally. Yeah. You did the ITP program at NYU.
Yes.
What was your degree before that?
I actually came from software engineering, and that really sort of directed my experience because I came from understanding technology very well, but using it in sort of very traditional means in the for profit world. Um, but that after spending a long time, I used to live in London and spending a long time working in tech companies and tech startups and seeing how how technology is used in advertising, in marketing, in business to really direct our attention to consumption, to production, to being part of a very fixed form of social interaction and social networks. I really came to ITP to try and use my skills in a way that was different, in a way that was more of a mean of expression, more of reflecting on the place of technology at large in society by using it in a way that's more playful and more creative. So coming to a program that is a technical program, but it's in the Tisch School of the Arts. It's in the art school, and having room to play, which is something I've never really had before, to me was really eye-opening because it allowed me to also see these tools and see these mediums in a different way. And I think a lot of my work since ITP has been about rethinking the place of technology in our lives, rethinking the place of digital media in our lives through the understanding of the inner workings of these systems that I have.
So if you started with software and then went to ITP and you said like you had room to play and start being like creative, had you had an artistic practice before that, or were you pretty cut and dry about like how to use your skills and not really using them when you went home?
I think there was a clear separation. I always experimented with music and with different kinds of digital media, but there was a clear separation. Code or making technology, let's say, was work, and play was something else. And it wasn't until I saw inspiring examples of media art that was really sort of at the intersection that it even occurred to me that that was a possibility, that I could be doing this for a living, that I could really use the same skills that I use at work to create different things. So seeing these kinds of examples and actually stumbling across the ITP show when I was just in New York was really an eye-opening experience. And I actually saw the show and I immediately applied to ITP just I think a week or two later.
And I'm wondering what the experience is like in the ITP program of being in art school from coming from a more technical job, like
Yeah.
the job that had led up to that, and being how did you change your way of like thinking to be more creative minded in this way?
I think there are a few sides to that, there are at least a few levels to that question. The first was this notion, I think that was shared across a large cut of the people who come to ITP who come from a different background. There are a lot of people who come from a technological background, and there are a lot of people who come, for example, from architecture, or from
Right.
fields where the cycle of iteration or the sort of bureaucracy of the creative process sometimes is too much to deal with. There are also a lot of people who come from art schools and artists and designers who are interested in incorporating technology into their practice. But I think the people who come from a more technical background feel like they're escaping into this sort of wild west of technology that was really liberating. It was really liberating because we can do whatever we want. It's not a product that needs to sell or justify itself beyond being an experiment or a means of expression. I think something that I'm still struggling with is, or at least I'm still working on and continuously trying to develop in my work, is how to not only consider technology as a canvas, but also to develop the kind of work that I do in a way that I think somebody with a more traditional arts background would be more inclined to do, or at least that is more part of their training. So using it as a tool rather than just a creative experiment. But I think it's an ongoing process. But the journey itself, at least throughout the time of the 2 years at ITP, it was just like a really like a long summer camp of just doing whatever we want and not having to justify it very much, which was really freeing in terms of what we allowed ourselves to do.
Yeah, that's incredible, and I think it's a good segue into asking about what is your, if any, what is your creative process? Like, what does it look like? Starting from what are the questions you're asking at the beginning of a new project or process? Where does that take you?
I think something that happened when I was at ITP that actually started with the project that was shown at Currents Panopticon was that there became a link in my mind, or at least in my curiosity, between technology and media. And they are, in a way, they are interchangeable. And it's not, it's not my reference. Like even in Marshall McLuhan's essays, technology and media are sort of interchangeable because they are forces that reshape culture. And I became much more interested in specifically image-based media and the way that we consume the world around us through mediated sort of mediated facades or mediated mediums, and what that means to how we perceive reality, we perceive our place in the world, and really questioning the place and purpose of technology in our lives. So trying to separate form and function. And it grew into a practice, again, something that started with Panopticon, of looking at the material, or like the formal qualities of image, of displays, of cameras, of the technology itself, and using the material and repurposing the material of technology almost. And I think that will be a bit clearer when we look at a few examples. But the material of a particular technology or medium to expose the way that it reshapes our view, or minimizes or reduces our view of the world in specific ways, in the way that power relationships and balances are implicit in the way that systems are used in our lives, for example, with Panopticon and surveillance systems, but not only that. And really remembering, or trying to draw attention to the fact that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It develops as a direct result of systems of value and purpose, in what we consider important and not important at a cultural and a social level, because specific technologies are invested or are desirable because they answer or respond to or accelerate specific cultural biases or values. I don't remember where I saw this, where I read that, reference, that when it boils down to the core of what technology is, it is always an accelerating force. You can think of transportation, you can think of guns, you can think of phones, you can think of the internet. They are all accelerating forces or accelerating means of the same basic human needs, which are to trade, to communicate, to, I don't know, kill each other.
Yeah.
But seeing technology from this sort of meta perspective, I think allowed me, also working on my thesis project at ITP, to continue to question I'd say the motivation, the cultural motivation, or the social motivations behind the way technology shapes our lives, and our lives shape the technology in sort of this endless cycle.
Yeah, I think that is something that's really interesting, is concept that technology is both like a symptom of the society while also the driving force behind it.
It's exactly that. I think you're putting it in a much more eloquent phrase, but it is a cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think that is something that can be really seen in media art, specifically, that there's often a physical element, something that's in like the quote unquote real space of the installation space, that seems to be both a symptom and the accelerating factor to the media that it's interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is shown pretty clearly in both Panopticon and in all the pieces in your show, sheer appearances, that there are elements that are a symptom of the digital experience while also enabling the digital experience to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, there is a tendency sometimes, I think particularly in some forms of media art, to fetishize technology in a way. The calls that the algorithm is going to get us are, in a way, at least in my opinion, are a little bit misguided, but because the algorithm is nothing but a manifestation of the way that we see the world, we think about processes, and somebody, some human or a group of humans put the algorithm into code. There is no technology that exists in the ether and in isolation from human values and biases and thought processes and cultural values that is trying to get us. And I think what is really interesting working in this field of media art is being able to try to use the same tools, the same technology that I'm trying to maybe criticize things like, again, production, surveillance, consumer culture through digital media to flip the switch and turn the screen into a mirror in a way that tries to draw attention to these things.
Yeah, totally. Well, how do you personally feel like you interact with the both physical and digital elements of your work? Like for me, seeing your pieces, I can't imagine the two being separated. Really, they're part of a work. Do
Yeah.
you feel like it's necessary for you to see like an object interacting with media and being involved in both of those instead of just creating like a VR piece, sort of like as an example?
Actually, yeah, I found that the material experiments have become more and more a driving force in my work, and that's also why it has been shifting towards a more of a sculptural form factor because it allows me these kinds of material experiments. Actually, show you an example if I can. Is it
Yeah,
okay if I share my screen? So maybe can you see my screen?
now I can. Yep.
Yeah. So maybe as an example of what I mean by thinking of both the physical form of digital media or the physical form of technology, and how that builds into the concept of a new work. First of all, is the example of, I guess, Panopticon, that again is the work that was shown in Currents in 2019, that really works off of the first of all, the shape of what a panopticon is, the conceptual design for a prison, and Jeremy Bentham's architectural theory to create this construction that is really surrounding the viewer, but then also working with the space with cameras that are embedded and are not really seen by viewers until they realize that they've been tracked. What we did in Currents is that we're really webcams all over the space. Every time we show Panopticon, actually, it's a new challenge to place these cameras everywhere. And working with the fact that the video is projected on this menacing scope, and it's the physical presence of the viewer in front of this object that activates it and reveals the fact that viewers have been surveilled on. But actually something that's more relating to the direct, I'd say, form and material of the technology that I've been working with is one of the pieces from the show, which you might have seen. It's called Split Screen, and it started from just experimenting with what's called polarizing film, which is a screen that actually exists inside digital displays. And the way that it works is that it blocks light in one direction and it reveals light in another. And that is how a layer of LCD in a display goes from being completely white to reducing certain frequencies or polarized light to reveal an image. So you can see that when two sheets of polarizing film oppose each other, they cancel out essentially entirely. So the fact that this complex optical phenomena exists inside pretty much all physical displays, to me, was really fascinating, because it shows both the degree of intricacy that is not really visible to the naked eye. We see, I think, more and more so, like I mentioned before, not only do we see the phone, as like my smartphone, not as something that is as complex as this layer of optical transformations of light, we also consume digital media more and more so as an extension of the real world, because it's something that is so immediately available, and it's also more and more so in recent years a large part of the way that we communicate with each other, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, where we're all home and basically consume reality through mediated means of social networks, news websites. We barely experience anything in the last few months firsthand. So the fact that our view of the world is mediated digitally, but also physically, and the fact that images are created in digital displays by removing information, by reducing light from an image rather than adding information to it, to me was really interesting. And it led me to actually get a few LCD screens and try to just butcher them in my studio. And at first, just experimenting with the material itself and see what kind of qualities I can get from working with the polarizing film that I removed. I actually had to scrape it off with a blade off the screen and then try to reconstruct it in different ways. So this is just, this is a 55-inch old LCD display that took, I didn't really know how to do this yet. So this is the scraping blade on the right, and it took, I think, 3 days and many, many, many cuts to try and get that film off. But working with the different, exposing the inner workings of a digital display to try and reveal the transformations or the reductive nature of digital media as we perceive the world through not just the screens, but what these screens represent and what they reveal, which is, again, social networks and news media that clearly have specific agendas. And what that...
I think that sort of meditation on material of just the idea that we are interacting with just like you were saying, over the past few months, like we're interacting with images through screens, and it's deducing our reality instead of sort of being like this additive force is
Yeah.
interesting. As time goes on, it's like we continue to add to the story of our own lives, right? But we're seeing it through a deductive lens almost. And I think
To
that
me, that was, I know it's sort of like, in a way, obvious, and going back to these kind of optical experiments can seem like going back to the low-tech side of things, of how images are made, but it was fascinating to me that move that sheet, that image is gone, and it only comes back once you start reducing information.
yeah. No, I think it's very interesting. And I think sometimes, like you were saying, getting back to the building blocks of like like how to make an image, how do we see an image, is
Yeah.
sometimes material meditations that are necessary. Once you get to a point that's so far gone past the building blocks, they stop mattering in your head. And so just going back to it is like sometimes really vital and can just be like the most exciting thing, really.
It's a great point, because I think the process of dealing with the material also makes me see screens in a different way. Every screen I see now, because I spent so long just deconstructing and reconstructing them. And I think that's, in a way, that's exactly the point of what I'm trying to get at with each of these projects, which is to remember, or to actually, it's really to remind myself and the viewers, whether they've never seen, whether you're born into the age of iPads and iPhones that are this one piece of, you know, technological portal into another dimension, or whether you lived through the development of this technology with the crappy old Nokia phones and cathode televisions, where the raw elements of technology were much more immediate. Images weren't crisp and there was static noise and things fail. But the more perfect things become, the more immediate they become, the more always connected we are, the more I think the layer of abstraction and the layer of reduction that comes with digital media becomes transparent to us. So working with the material is a way of reminding, myself and others, I hope, that there is a separation between technology and real life. There is a separation between me on social media and me in real life. There is a separation between the images that I see and the camera that captured them, that was pointed in a particular direction with a particular producer with particular opinions. And I think these lines are becoming more and more blurred.
Well, I think that also is like something that I think about so often, is that just because like social media and quote unquote real life are different things, one or the other is not bad. there's not a moral distinction between your technological space and the real space that you inhabit. I don't know. It's yeah, it's definitely
I know what you mean, and I think a lot of it comes from trying to force some kind of framework that we have in real life onto these digital spaces. And at the same time, we tend to forget that there is a separation between digital space and real life. And I think more and more so, actually, it's the digital way of living. I think especially now we're going to see some interesting shifts in how we communicate and how we live our lives, because our attention spans are shortening. We communicate less in length and depth. And a lot of these things are results of the fact that the digital space is where we exist almost most of the time, especially in our social interactions. Yeah, so sort of picking up where I left off with this, I think what led from these earlier experiments with the material, which were, usually would be how my work goes when I'm working with either video-based projects or light-based projects, or more recently kinetic sculptures or kinetic elements, is that it starts with something raw as working with the film itself, and then peeling it off the screen and seeing what is the affordance of the material once it's not just a single product or like a single entity, like a screen. And working through the material and working through what I was thinking about at the time about social networks and digital media, and this was back in January, before sort of a precursor in my mind to the situation we're living in now. It led to the development of the series that since then was titled Split Screen. And with Split Screen, I tried to re-reveal images in a way that draws, I think, a parallel to how they are fragmented in real life, and how the completeness of them, in what they represent, in what they convey, in the information that they provide, is just as fractured. There are two screens in the series right now. Both of them were shown in the exhibition Sheer Appearances. One that is connected to a video camera and shows a live stream of the user. And I think I have a video of it that I can show you. It shows a live stream of the cameras that is also, again, fragmented a second time. Again, playing on this idea of being able to only perceive a slither of the image from a single perspective. So you can see that my image is there, and it's sort of fragmented in itself, and it's seen in shards through the suspended polarizer. And to me, that responds to how we are forced to clean up and square off our personas depending on the digital arenas that we operate in, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. We are constantly forced to fragment our identity and fit different parts in different places, in a way that ties to what you were mentioning, to trying to fit these sort of moral parameters around the different social spaces that we exist in. But these parameters were enforced by a certain corporation or a certain marketing team that decided that that would be the right positioning for the platform, not that it's necessarily the right way to engage with one another.
it's so nice to see that video again and be reminded of how incredible it was to see in person. I loved this piece so much, and I loved this show, and I hadn't gotten the chance to tell you. Congrats on it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm really glad you got to see it in person. I know
I'm really
it was a
glad to
long trip, probably. It was really interesting to see people interact with these, especially the one with the camera, when they realize that it's also representing them and that there's an interactive element to all of this, because they weren't. A lot of people, I think younger people particularly, didn't really realize it's a screen and what exactly is going on until they had some time to look through the shards and realize that probably other screens behave this way as well. And it's sort of this aha moment that was really, really fun to watch. And the second piece is, again, sort of a reflection of digital media, not so much social networks, more so news broadcast, and the tendency to, I think, switch between different disasters around the world in a way that is frequently impersonal, but also the way that nature is represented through digital media in a way that is somewhat sterile and acts, I think, as a sort of a background to somewhat a human-centric existence, I can say. So it was a juxtaposition of a very modified, heavily processed image, and I can play this again, and maybe it will come across through these shards, image of or video of a waterfall and footage. And this also came not that long after the fires in Australia, that with all of the mess going around the world is almost a distant memory, but in January was still quite fresh. So there are two videos here, and they are composited one on top of the other. One of this slowed down waterfall gushing and beautiful and harmless, a harmless image of nature that we can enjoy as a backdrop. And alongside it, a video that was actually made quite famous of a girl in a village in Australia trying quite helplessly to prevent fires from consuming parts of her house, her and her father, in this first person view that is really horrific of her trying to fight the flames, and clearly it's a lost battle. And juxtaposing these two images, and I'll go back to you, trying to juxtapose these two images of nature and the way that both of them in a way are really contradicting each other, because I think of the way that we tend to represent even disaster, but nature in general as through a lens that is again reductive. I think especially when we live in urban environments and we consume these things through screens, it can seem quite detaching to see these flyover footage of fires in Australia without really understanding the human element of them. And I really wanted to find footage that was first person, that really screamed the personal struggle of facing these flames, and is actually really terrifying to watch, but in a way bringing in the fact that the way that these disasters are covered, the way that whether it's a fire or a hurricane that is somewhere else, that is distant, that is remote, is seen in a way that is not tying to immediate danger. And I think it has to do a lot with the way that we perceive climate change. We perceive imminent changes to the way that we live our lives, the disasters that are soon to be coming. And again, hopefully maybe something like the current pandemic will change our attitudes, because they are so universal and they're not something that we can fence or distance ourselves off from geographically. But I think the way that we see the world through a third person view in so many occasions really has a negative effect to how much we can really engage and empathize with what is destined to be, a rather universal future.
Right. I think that that's an interesting idea, because it does directly relate back to some of that first imagery of war seen on TV from Vietnam, and people seeing just seeing disaster through a screen for the first time, and that being sort of the beginning mark of depersonalizing horrific imagery, and how used to that we are. And I think deconstructing the image to understand the depersonalization is a really interesting tactic, because it forces you to try and piece the picture back together in your own mind and repersonalize it.
And relate to it in a way that I think is more visceral and more personal and more immediate, and I think it's heartbreaking, but many times you'll see videos of polar bears stuck on a melting iceberg and in the North Pole, and people probably scroll through social feeds and see that and think that it's very sad, but it doesn't. We are so overwhelmed with disaster, with these kinds of oversaturated, not only in the color sense of the way, but the way that everything is edited for maximum emotional impact, that I think we're all becoming desensitized but that has a very dangerous effect of really removing us from the challenges that we're facing either individually or as a global society. And again, I think something like maybe the universal nature of this pandemic has has the potential to change that. Maybe that's some kind of a silver lining. But even within, even within the way that the pandemic unfolded globally, there was a lot of sort of Schadenfreude at China when the pandemic was starting there in Eastern Asia until it sort of hit in full swing in the West and particularly in the US. So even with these cases, we see how when things are covered through the lens of sensational news media, they are amplified to the point where we become completely tone deaf.
But I think that you really went in depth about your thought process of or physical process creating art, and I'm really thankful that you gave us that view in. But I just want to know if you have anything coming up or if there's things you're excited about right now.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, this is great. Hopefully, I didn't blabber too much.
No, no.
And I've been taking this time to explore because, as you can imagine, New York is somewhat shut down, and really rethink the last year and the exhibition and the topics that I've been working in, and thinking about how I can fit the way that the world is changing into my practice. So I'm really excited for hopefully reopening soon and being able to be back in my studio and making some new work with these fresh experiences in mind. But hopefully life will resume back to normal soon for all of us.
Yeah, I hope that too, and I hope that we get to see you very soon.
I
And
hope so. IRL.
yeah, IRL. Okay, thank you so much for talking, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.